Hello and welcome back into another edition of Head Coach U. I am Bryan Fischer of D1.ticker. Thrilled to be welcomed as always by former Virginia and BYU coach Bronco Mendenhall. And Bronco, we have another guest this week, somebody really special that you know well, Dave Clawson, the head coach at Wake Forest. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Bryan and Bronco. And I've listened to every one of them, and I really enjoy it. And I think you guys are doing a great job. And I'm sure for everybody in the coaching industry has benefited from this.
One of the things, check is Bryan, in the mail for that.
Yeah, one of the things, Bryan, that I don't know, is the way this works for those that are listening is I kind of choose who comes on. And, you know, when someone's impacted my life along the way, either as a coach or a professional or as a human being, right, that I think can add value to this profession that needs leadership at probably now more than ever. And young people need leadership now more than ever. You know, that's how you qualify. And so Dave and I got to know each other when I first came to the CC. And what's so impactful is the place that Dave coaches at Wake Forest is very unique and specific. And sometimes, right, that the outside world thinks that excludes you from being able to have really strong success football-wise. And I just don't believe that. And I know Dave doesn't either. And then eventually you find the right scheme, the right strategy, the right leadership, the right people, you get the right fit, and things start to come to fruition that in spite of, or maybe the weaknesses perceived at a school become strengths with the right coach and the right leader. And that's what I think Dave has done. And so I just thought there'd be so many lessons that others could learn from having Dave on, not only as a leader and a coach, but as a person. And so that's how you get qualified to be on. So we're so good to have you, Dave.
Well, I'm honored, Bronco, and you know the respect that I have for you. And I don't know if I would have got through the COVID season without you. You know, those Monday and Tuesday talks of what we were doing and the purpose of it. Those are very challenging times. And I don't know if I could have got through that 2020 season without some of the advice and counsel that you were giving me. So I feel the same way.
Well, I want to touch upon that here in just a little bit. But before we do, Dave, you just came off a big win against Army. And Bronco, I know you guys ended up playing quite a few of those triple option teams when you were back at your BYU days. You played Air Force quite a bit in the Mountain West. Now, I'm curious, from your standpoint, what's more difficult to prepare for? Is it that triple option teams, especially maybe on a short week, or is it Dave's slow mesh that you got to worry about as a defensive guy?
Man, that's a tough question. So the triple option, because that is so distinct and different, and the teams that do it well, it takes you to a whole other place. And quite frankly, the best part of playing a triple option team, which was my favorite, by the way, regardless of outcome, because of the fundamentals and the challenge and just rethinking like all what you know about football and does it fit when you play a team like that. So just when we kind of became option defense experts and kind of got that dialed in, then we took a shellacking playing Navy one year at Virginia as I was trying to help those kids kind of learn how to defend the option, right? Which was sometimes you have to go through it before you try it. And then we played Dave my first year, maybe the first shoot, right at the beginning of my career at Virginia. And the slow mesh was slow and not meshing as well. But Dave's team won. And then the next time we played, it was, it's slow and it's meshing pretty dang well. And then the next time it was this thing, whatever this is formidable. And so it's been fun for Dave to see the vision that he had, and then the continuity and the stick-to-itiveness. Because a lot of times, you know, people abandon things when it's not just perfect. And the stick-to-itiveness with the foresight of what it could become and the advantage that could lend. And man, you add a couple receivers on the outside of that when you're meshing and slowing and running and having to deal with that. And then the RPO-ish action, and you just end up with one-on-ones. And that's a tough deal. And so anyway, the foresight for all that, I'm not sure which is harder, but they're both really hard. And that's a credit to the designer.
Dave, I'll flip that question around for you. Playing that triple option, you know that you're going to have some limited possessions there just because of the clock that they're going to soak up. Does that put any additional pressure on you and your staff in terms of, hey, we got to score at some time? Is there that feeling that, hey, we got to do a little bit more every time we have the football?
Absolutely. And I think whenever you play a triple option team, whether it be Army, Navy, one of the academies, is there's so much emphasis put on the defense of defending a different style of attack and playing, the cut blocks and the different formations and all the different motions they run. But it's a team game, and the offense is part of that. Is you're not going to get a lot of possessions, and you better score when you get the football. And so you go into that game saying, for every 3 times you get the ball, you better score at least twice. Because if you ever allow those teams to get ahead of you, it becomes a really long day. And yet if you can jump out to a lead and make them play from behind, then at times they're forced to do things they're not as comfortable doing. So, it's not just about how are you going to defend it, but the offense plays a huge role in that. And, a year ago, we played Army up at West Point, and we won 70-56. And,
wow.
I don't know, this year, we had a little different scheme. But I think the biggest part of it is getting your players to embrace the challenge of defending the triple option. There's so much of it of, D linemen, they don't want to be cut block. And, it requires a level of discipline and focus that's unique in terms of defense when you play that style. And I just think that the best job that our defensive staff did this year was just getting them to embrace the challenge of what it would take to win a game like that. And then our offensive staff did a great job of coming up with a plan and getting the players to understand the value of every play and the value of every rep and not falling behind the chains. Because against Army, a 1st and 10 that becomes a 2nd and 15 becomes a 3rd and 12. And now you're giving up a possession and you might only get 8 of them. So you can't waste the play.
To back up Dave's point, I remember, and I used to circle it, and when the season or when our schedule would come out at BYU, I would go right to the Air Force game, and I would start promoting that game to our players the minute it came off the presses. And that became literally one of the most exciting and formidable games that they look forward to. But that comes from the leader, right? And presenting it as a huge opportunity rather than, we have to go do this and play. And so really just how it's presented, back to what Dave was saying, is such a huge point. And man, when you play well against one of those teams, there's a sense of accomplishment that is well earned. And that's a huge marker for a program.
And the big difference was a year ago, we won that game 70-56. And I think only half of our football team felt like they played in a winning football game. And what was so rewarding this year is our whole football team felt like they played in a winning football game. And, the pride of our defense of taking something we didn't defend well a year ago, working at it, applying themselves, embracing it, and then having success. But like you said, Bronco, when you play a game like that, you can't put the defense in the week of the game.
Yeah.
So we devoted a day in spring football to it. We devoted 4 practices in fall camp to it. We took 10-minute periods almost every Sunday, just so when we did get to the game week and we had the calls, it wasn't putting in a new defense. So it takes an inordinate amount of time and commitment level from the whole program to just prepare for that one game.
And I think what's happening now, and we weren't together or in the same league quite long enough, but I think what will happen now is as Dave and Wake Forest brand has grown, right, to be expected to win, right, and expected to compete for conference championships, then that same approach, other schools that will play Wake Forest now will be doing the same with that style of play, right, that Wake Forest has, because the results have been demonstrated that it's going to work, right? And you can not prepare for it at your own peril, or you use only game week if you want at your own peril. And so when you start building in the other things, it's the greatest compliment, but it gives confidence to your players, but it also lets them know, man, way before that game is even played, that it's going to be important and it's going to require a different mindset. And it's, as the culture grows, like in Dave's program, right, there's another story that's just added. That Army game that was just won is now a story that's passed on of how you play that game and how you play that team. And that now lives on, and it prevents a more likely chance that it happens again.
So.
And Dave, you guys are on your bye week. You just taking a little bit of a break here to chat with us here on the HeadCoachU podcast. And I'm curious, how do you structure your bye weeks? I think that's something a lot of coaches do a lot very differently. Some give a lot of time to the players to have off. Others, want to get them right back into practice. Not much change other than you're not playing on Saturday. How do you structure your bye weeks there at Wake, and how has that approach maybe changed over the years, going back to your early head coaching days?
It's changed a lot. And the more we learn about sports science and how the body recovers and the level of activity to prevent injuries, right? There's this whole idea that, hey, we're halfway through the season, just give them the week off and rest them. And our research has shown if you do that, we've increased the likelihood of an injury the next week. So it's this complete balance. And we just had a staff meeting. And you almost talk about every player on the team of what do they need in the bye week. So the fifth-year senior that's played 2,700 reps, what he needs is a lot different than maybe what your third offensive tackle needs who hasn't played a lot. And so you almost need to structure the practice in a way that the guys that have had a lot of reps and they're sore and they're banged up, that they feel that they're recovered before our next game prep. And then there's this development aspect of what we do, that there's, 8 to 12 people that fortunately they haven't had to play 40, 50, 60 plays in a game yet because we stayed healthy, but they're one injury away from having to do that. So what do they need this week? Because who knows when you're going to need them? It might be week 8, week 9, week 10. You can never predict those things. But if you don't get them ready, you can be guaranteed they're not ready. And so we try to have a certain level of activity so that you don't go from full speed to nothing back to full speed. But at the same time, there are guys that have played a lot of football, that there is some wear and tear. And we want those guys feel like the battery's charged for the second half of the season.
Bronco, how do you guys approach the bye week in your programs?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of piggyback off what Dave was saying. It's really a unique challenge because you're looking for individuality and specificity within a collective. And so you still want your team culture to grow. And there's still areas of emphasis within your team that need to be addressed. And it might be, I don't know, third and medium, or it might be red zone offense or defense, or it might be kick coverage. There's still things that you've identified along the way that need attention and can be improved through all the data and analysis that you have a little bit more time to look at. But it does start with the people and the players. And so there's a cool exercise physiology principle called SAID, specific adaptation to imposed demand. And so what Dave was just saying, there's been certain players on his team that their imposed demand has been at a different level than others, right? And so it's not all the same. And so during the bye week, the imposed demand can be altered a little bit, right? Some need more recovery, some need more demand to stay ready. And then hopefully you're designing the cultural context and the strategic context to improve while all that's going on. And at the same time, let's be honest, the coaches, there's a fatigue factor and a renewal factor, that there's a moment or an hour or a day that can be captured during the bye week that's going to return yield down the stretch with fresher leaders. And so that doesn't mean, everyone's on the golf course, but it does mean, if possible, efficiency increased with a little more renewal built in. I always thought I wanted the leaders to be excited to play more football also. And sometimes, man, I can't say it overrode the players, but it was on my mind a lot.
Yeah, absolutely right, Bronco. We had our staff meeting today, and we're getting ready to play Boston College out of the break. And one of the messages to the staff is, I don't want anybody in their office at 5:01 today.
That's awesome.
Like, get home, have dinner with your families. We're going to recruit later in the week because, we need to do that during a bye week. But these 3 days are one of the very few days in coaching that there's no reason to not be having dinner with your families. And what that does for their mental outlook and their health, and gets them excited about the second half of the year. We all need to get refreshed because, as this is a marathon, and we just hit the 13.1 mile marker of our season. and we need to get a little bit of a break and get excited about the second half.
One of the things too, Brian, is one of the hallmarks of great cultures and programs, or really any organization that really, I think, thrives, gratitude is at the core of that. And when the leader is looking for opportunities to care for those that he works with, that goes it goes a long ways, right? And you don't do it to be recognized. You do it because you care about and you're thankful for the people that are working with you. So gratitude is going both ways, right? So you're looking to give them every chance to have success, but also have some semblance of balance in a time that really doesn't allow for it. And so when a decision like that is made, that statement, there's just a little extra pep in the step of a staff when they go out, because their hearts are more captured now than ever, because they're being cared for, right? And that's, man, not in college football, that being cared for mentality, I think, is becoming a lost art. And that's too bad.
Yeah. And, you bring up the slow mesh and what we've been able to do on offense, but, quite frankly, I get way too much credit for it. Our offensive coordinator, Warren Ruggiero, is really the genius behind it. He's the one that kind of recognized early in our time here at Wake Forest that it was going to be hard for us to be traditional, that we'd have to do something a little bit different, a little thinking outside the box. And we have good players, but if we could add that element of making what we do unique and different. And Warren and I have worked together for 14 years, and he has an incredible work ethic. He's very bright. He's a very good play caller. And I think part of the reason we've had success here is that we have had staff stability. And, these are guys I trust, and they're going to work really hard. And they're almost guys, if you don't tell them to go home at 5:01, just out of habit, they're going to stay. And whether it's Kevin Higgins, our wide receiver coach, and, again, over half the staff has been with me for all 9 years, and I trust them, and I know they're going to work hard. And, I recognize that they need these breaks, and, hopefully these are little things that make them enjoy their work environment here. They're here not because they have to be. They've certainly had other opportunities, and I'm really grateful that they've chose to stay and help us build it, because they're as responsible as anybody for the success we've had.
That word trust it's easily used, but rarely understood of what that truly takes. And I heard one time, and I've used this a lot, trust is built with time, consistency, and results. And it takes all three. So just being together for a long time doesn't mean, right? That could mean actually you don't trust someone when you get to know them really well. So you have time, but the consistency, meaning they are going to do what they say they're going to do every time, right? And when you get enough, there's a tipping point after the 100th time they said this and do that, it's like, you know what? That's always going to happen. And then if those decisions actually yield, right? If it yields success, then all of a sudden, and really we can't coach anyone that doesn't want a relationship and doesn't want to be coached. They have to choose somewhere along the line to trust us that what we're saying is going to work, and coaches as well. And so when I chose to come to Virginia, I brought, I believe it was 14 staff members, much like Dave was saying, because I trusted them. I've seen them in about every context. That doesn't mean they were the best staff, but I knew exactly what they were capable of, what we were capable of. And that starting and reference point was already united. There wasn't having to be trust established. So at least we had that part. And then hopefully we could learn and grow. And when you have a staff over half of for 9 years, that not only, right, there's been enough time, right, there's been enough consistency and results. Man, when you find something like that, why would you leave? And because it's really hard to develop. And so that's a huge advantage. And it shows each year because Dave's programs continue to improve, right? It's not where there's flattening and et cetera. That comes with the consistency, right? And that's by design, right? It's not by accident.
Yeah, I mean, our running back coach, John Hunter, has been 14 straight years at 2 different schools. And our receiver coach, Kevin Higgins, I worked for him in 1994 at Lehigh. Yeah. So there's a lot of history here. Our defensive line coach and I, Dave Cohen, we GA'd together in 1989. And so, again, I trust them. And the other thing with all these coaches is I've seen them, how they go through hard years. Our second year at Bowling Green, we were 2-10. And the same work ethic, the same commitment to excellence, the same mindset of we're going to get this thing fixed and make it better. Their work habits didn't change, whether we had success or failure. They were the same people every day. And that's really hard to find. And like I said, I mean, there's no way we would be having this type of success here if it wasn't for the staff that we have. As you know, Bronco, the head coach and the quarterback, right? They get too much credit and too much of the blame. And I am so grateful for the staff that I have. They're just outstanding, and Wake Forest is fortunate to have them.
And when the players within each one of those units feels the same way, that their coach is grateful for them. And so when I was leaving Virginia, when I made my decision to pause, a player came in and unsolicited, and he sat down and he just said, "Coach, I just wanted to say what I appreciated most was consistency. I didn't have to wonder when I showed up at the building who you were going to be and what you were going to be, whether we won or whether we lost." And he said that was probably the lesson he would take from college football, especially when he's being a parent, because possibly his parents were a little more volatile, and there was some anxiety coming home as to what it was going to look like. And college football becomes a really cool place to lead from if you can earn trust through the things that we're talking about, because the impact, right? The impact is really what we're hopeful to do on maybe helping these kids.
And I think we have probably two of the best rebuilders of programs in all of college football on this podcast. And Dave, I'm curious from your perspective. I mean, you rebuilt Fordham from 0-11 to go into the Patriot League title for, I think, first time in a decade back in the day. You took Richmond and turned it around. Bowling Green. We mentioned 9 years at Wake Forest, and now being a consistent top 25 team. There's not one probably secret to success in that, but what are some of the ingredients in terms of things that that you have to do, are kind of out there and trying to rebuild a program?
Well, I think with all the programs, your core values have to stay the same. So the things that you believe in terms of the academics, the accountability, the discipline, those are things, in terms of coaches having the best interest of the players always at the forefront of every decision. Those things have been consistent across all four programs. Now, the how we do it has completely changed, because these are four completely different schools. And so, what we've done offensively, defensively, in the kicking game, how we recruit, all of those things have to be specific to the institution you work at. Because if I took the same offense, defensive scheme that I used at Fordham, that wouldn't have worked at Richmond, and that wouldn't have worked at Bowling Green. So much of it is assessing at the school you're at. Okay, what are the reasons you can win? What are the reasons you should win? And everywhere you go that you're rebuilding, all you do is hear all the reasons why you're not winning. And you have to just completely cut that out and say, we are what we are. The school is what it is. Let's sell the positives. Because if we can't sell the positives, how are the players or the institution or the board or the president or the AD or the fan base ever going to buy in? And so, to me, you take all these things that people always give as the reason you can't win, and they become the reason you do win. But you have to have everybody in your program embrace that and truly believe it. Because if the coaches don't, then the players never will. And that has to permeate through your staff, strength coaches, trainers, academic advisors. This is why we will win. And this is our philosophy. And again, the core values in terms of how we treat people and the emphasis we put on developing the whole player, whether it be academically, spiritually, socially, professional opportunities after football, those things have pretty much been the same. But, the style of offense, defense, all that stuff, you have to be flexible with that stuff, because it's not one size fits all.
I'd love to, it resonates so much. The very first thing, and We started 2-10 at Virginia. I spent the first year doing nothing other than discovering what Virginia really was. And then after that, trying to design scheme and strategy and approach to deliver Virginia, meaning this particular place with these particular strengths and these particular challenges. Okay, now let's really get into what modifications as to what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Again, on the anchor point of principle, as Dave was saying, those remain the same. But I love the idea of specificity. And to say that coaching at Brigham Young University with 85% of your team as returned missionaries is the same place as the University of Virginia, which is world-class academically with a completely different demographic, I just don't adhere to that. So Dave's approach and mine mesh clearly. And so if we do have in common this idea of being successful rebuilders, it's because of the specificity approach and how do we distinguish ourselves. And there's a great quote on strategy: you either play a different game or you play the same game different. When you have challenges, to say that you just, so some coaches, right, they'll only inherit or only consider programs that are already going. In those cases, the amount of specificity or adaptation isn't as much. The places that Dave and I have been, it requires every way possible to deliver a place or a clientele, right, or an institution in its own way. And it's more fulfilling because your football program is then aligned with an institution and it becomes a matching identity, which is, it's good for everybody.
Dave, you look at Wake Forest in particular. I mean, you've been there 9 seasons. You certainly have a lay of the land. It's one of the smallest schools in all of the Power Five. How do you use that as an advantage when you're going out and recruiting, when you're selling the school? How are you kind of using that small size to your advantage?
Well, we are the smallest school in the Power Five by enrollment, and our sell, and it's genuine and it's true, is that where else in the country can you play Power Five football and get more individual attention? That, you know, the size of the classrooms, the size of the campus. I'm sitting at my desk right now and I'm looking out my window and I'm looking at a residence hall that 15 of our freshmen live in. And their ability and their access to come over here and not just to study film or go to the nutrition center, you know, but God forbid something bad happens in their life and they want support. They don't have to jump in a car or a shuttle bus. It's a 300-yard walk away. And I think because of that, I've never worked at a school that you can develop such deep relationships with the players just because we see them all the time. We're right in the middle of campus. Everything's a walk. And, you know, I think one of the biggest cliches in recruiting, right, is everybody everywhere says, hey, we're family, we're family. And, you know, it's just a thrown out cliche. And yet there's some places I worked at is the only time you see your players is those 3.5 hours a day that they're required to be there. Because when practice is over, you know, this person lives 20 minutes away. This guy lives all the way on the other side of campus and has to take a shuttle bus everywhere. And we're just able to create an environment here that we're around our players so often, and they get to know our faculty members. Our faculty here are incredibly supportive. They get to know our players. We have juniors and seniors here that take classes, and there might only be 8 to 10 people in the class, and every class is taught by a full professor. And so the emphasis here is on the undergraduate education, and it's just a unique place that people don't fall through the cracks here. And that level of attention that we say we give, we actually deliver it. And it's great to work at a school that you don't feel that you're ever being a used car salesman in recruiting.
There's an approach to the healthiest cultures. And Dave has a chance with an intimate program based on numbers, right? That's what we just heard. But let's face it, in my pause and what I've learned is what has mattered most to me and what's been the most lasting has been the relationships. I hardly remember any of the seasons, like, and the records by season or games, moments with the players. And so the healthiest cultures are when the players don't want to leave your building. And so besides the mandatory, right, football meetings and practice, what's fun is when you start seeing success with your program, even before the record, the players don't leave. And in between breaks, here they are showing up, and the coaches' doors are open, and they're being, right? They're not being pushed in. They're being drawn in, and moved by their heart to connect with people they love and care about, who just happen to be their coaches too. And those are the kind of places and relationships that, man, if you can get that and play Power 5 football and then play winning Power 5 football and get a really quality education at the same time, now you're starting to talk about kind of the model I see for what college football really, I hope, ends up moving back to or becoming more of.
And that's been one of the benefits of being somewhere for 9 years, is when you say what the program is like, and this is how we run things, and then you have players in the program that can tell recruits, yes, that's exactly the way it's like. That when you first get to a place, you try to sell a vision. And then once you have a track record somewhere, you know, the vision, it's not a vision, it's not hypothetical, it's real. And, you know, part of our success here is we've had very little attrition. You know, in college football nowadays with the transfer portal, I don't think anybody's not going to have any attrition. But for the most part, we've been able to keep our players here. And I think part of that comes from that the things that we say that we're going to do in recruiting, it's very important that you follow up and actually do those things.
Ruffin McNeil worked on my staff for one season at Virginia, and what an amazing human being. He had this saying, in only the way Ruffin could say it. He would just say, "Real recognizes real," and then he would say, "You can't con a con," and in his way, that just means, right, be truthful, and players know, and people know when you are and when you're not, and so, man, when you are sincere. And when your true intent is to deliver upon what you say, whether it's recruiting or not, like I don't endorse this idea of recruiting is one message, and then when they're in your program, it's another message. And that's fairly common. What Dave is referring to is it's the same message, and that consistency is what eventually builds trust. And then when you're the players in your organization present that, that's far more powerful than either Dave or I could then present it. Coming from one of their peers, you know, with an arm around him, walking down the hall on a visit, is, hey, let me just tell you that this is what it's like here. And then if, I don't know, we're giving a PowerPoint or something and that matches, that's kind of the mouth of two witnesses, right? Which is way more powerful than just a presentation.
But was that what kind of made that 2020 COVID season just so difficult, Dave? I mean, just not having those kind of familiar family bonds that you're used to walking across campus.
Yeah, I mean, that made it hard. I mean, part of my favorite part of doing this is when you have the team events, you know, you have your kickball tournament, you have your team meals, you have these little gatherings that you're bringing players to your homes. And to me, when you didn't have that, 2020 just completely became transactional. It was all about football and the results on the field. There was none of these things that make your program transformational. And that made it hard. And quite honestly, it made it really unrewarding. And before the 20 season started, you know, Bronco and I probably had more talks about how we were managing things, even though we were going to play each other. And, you know, I told the staff, the whole goal of 20 is let's not mess up 21. Right now, what these players are going through in terms of isolation and stress and mental health issues, if we don't make the 3 to 4 hours that they're with us doing football the most enjoyable part of their day, we will lose something far greater than games. And so we just did anything we could that we could think of to try to make their time in the football office enjoyable. And we just didn't want to lose guys and then have it affect the 21 season. And, you know, it was a roller coaster. You know, we got off to a tough start and then we won a few games and it finished strong, but we didn't lose our culture, which I think really allowed us to come out of the pandemic and have the season that we had in 21. So I thought our coaches did a great job of not making it all transactional, that listening to them and understanding the stresses they were under and doing everything we could possibly do to make their lives better, at the same time following the 25,000 different COVID protocols we had. I mean, I think our players had, a Q-tip put up their nose more than they had a team meal that year. And that became hard for all of us.
There was a time during the COVID year, again, and we didn't know as coaches, is this even safe? Like when two people run into each other and their sweat bangs into each other and they have it, what's going to happen? We didn't know. And the medical profession didn't know. And I was really clear early on with Dave, I don't think we ought to play football. I don't think we know what's going to happen. And I wasn't like okay with the risk because I didn't know what the outcome was. I remember early practices, I was blowing a bullhorn every 30 seconds to have players run away from each other. So we're trying to practice football. And even on the sideline, I've got guys spread out over every bit of grass we could have because they're too close to each other. And did that feel transactional? And we've just been talking this whole podcast about the other part. Well, how can you get close if you can't get close? And so it became this whole thing of that question, how are we going to get close without being close? And, and they're keeping score at the same time. I think we all believed there might be some relief this season on outcome. Shoot, once the first game happened, they kept score. And the texts and emails and all the questions I got weren't about the protocols anymore. They were right back to the outcome. And I was like, wow, is this how this is going to be? And so, man, it was a challenge.
Yeah, and I think we had one of the more active kind of coaching carousels that year too, despite all the challenges that head coaches face. And David, you look at the ACC in particular. Your commissioner Jim Phillips has done a fantastic job on the D1 transformation committee. He's heavily involved in kind of changing over and looking at differences and how you can kind of alter the football calendar as it stands. If you were kind of put in charge, if you were the czar, you were talking to Jim, what kind of advice or what kind of things would you like to see in terms of changes to the sport itself moving forward?
Well, Jim actually put me in charge of putting that calendar together with Bubba Cunningham. So a lot of those things originated from the ACC, and Bubba and I met many times on it. I think right now, Brian, what's really changed in coaching, and Bronco can relate to this because this is my 34th year as a college football coach, but there's just not any downtime anymore, and especially for the assistant coaches. I mean, there used to be a time that, the summers you were able to get away, and now you're constantly recruiting, and between smartphones and the sped up signing dates, that it really is getting unhealthy. There's just no time off. There's no breaks. And there's this pace. And it is true. Like if your recruit's calling you and you're not there to take the call, somebody else is, and is there a possible way to just make this a little bit more healthier for everybody involved? Can we build in some breaks? And even putting in the February dead period that recruits couldn't visit, has been really healthy because now we're able to spend time with our own team. Is that you spend so much time recruiting these guys, and then once you have them, you want to spend time with them and develop a relationship with them and get to know them. And there's less and less opportunity to do that. So, I'd love there to be more devoted time of spend time with your own team, develop those relationships. You recruit these guys for 2 years and get to know them, now really get to know them and dive into them. And I think if that happened, there'd be a lot less activity in the portal. And I think, the expanded college football playoff, it sounds like that's the direction we're going to go, but, every time you add a game, there's an impact on the players and just what's a way of doing this in a safe manner that also looks out for their safety. So again, I think the expanded playoffs is going to happen. I think it's a good team. There's more opportunity, but let's do it in a way that we're not just pounding weeks and weeks onto players' bodies.
Yeah, and I think you know, sitting at 5-1 in the top 25, you'd be one of those teams kind of in the mix for the 12-team playoff. You mentioned the sports science aspect too. I know that's been a particular focus of several ACC coaches. Dabo Swinney has spoken about that in particular, that the stress on players' body. You know, are there ways to kind of overcome that a little bit? Maybe moving up to week 0, having another built-in bye week in the season. Is that something that you know, you coaches would like to see if we do move to that 12-teamer?
I think we would. I just think, I don't know how much the players want to start camp in July, right? Because that's some of the time that is downtime. I mean, you really build your team in the summer, you know, when they're there lifting and working out together and getting together on their own, throwing the football. And that June and July time is such a bonding time for a football team. And if we have to go to week 0, we have to go to week 0. But I think, you know, anytime you can build in breaks and build in days off, and you always want it to be something they're looking forward to doing. And, you know, and that's the challenge, because, you know, on the back end of this, right, the players want to get ready for the combine and guys graduate. And you don't want to be necessarily playing college football into February and have that impact the guys that have a chance to get drafted and go to the combine. So moving it back becomes hard. So the only option is really moving it up. And if that's what we have to do, we have to do it. But, you know, let's not lose sight of trying to find ways of giving players breaks and time off, because they need it mentally. And, you know, they also need it academically. These guys are still going to class and writing papers and taking tests. You know, none of that stress has been relieved from them, and it shouldn't be. That's part of being a college football player.
Two things from my perspective, right? College football happens against the backdrop and embedded in higher education. I haven't listened to many articles, podcasts, or anyone talk about higher education. And that goes on with college football, right? And quite frankly, will have a lasting effect on these kids' futures that seems to be an afterthought right now in most of college football. And I'm not okay with that. I think you can do, and I think you can do both at a really high level. And I think a lot of special coaches are really trying to do that. The other part is, and my intent is to have Blake Anderson come on, the mental health of young people in this environment, and for older people. And I've experienced it myself as a head coach. This idea that you can be under that amount of stress, and this isn't a complaint, this is just a reality, sustained pressure for that long without a possible impact is a faulty assumption. Young people, their mental health, their leaders' mental health, right, and their well-being have to be figured out within this entire model. And that's what Dave was working on. Because if there isn't some oscillation, right, and some attempt for ups and downs when you're on or when you're off, then people break. Young people break. And there's damage done. And we're responsible to help be the guardians of that, right, and design programs and a structure to help them gain mental health besides physical health and have a great college experience. And so we're now talking about kind of a master plan that Dave's worked on, that there's a lot at stake here. Not only for just young people, but grown-ups too, in terms of their well-being, right? And if we're not careful, finance alone will be the only decider of what happens. And these things we're talking about now have to be weighed in, and from the right leaders, they will be.
And, you know, one of the things I love working at Wake Forest is our players are high achievers, and they just don't want to be high achievers as football players. They want to be high achievers academically. And I am so glad that this is our bye week, not because it's the halfway point of the season, but this is the week a lot of our players have midterms. Mm-hmm. And so when you have these players, that part of the reason they pick Wake Forest is they want to be challenged academically, and they want to take difficult courses and take challenging majors. Their midterms are really important to them. And so when we can have this bye week now that a lot of those papers and midterms are done, and we can give them a little bit more time to focus on another aspect of their life that is very, very important to them as well. And it's part of our sell of why you come to Wake Forest. You know, I'm always glad when this bye week is during this week academically as much for football reasons.
And let's face it, right? No one's tracking the top 25 GPAs. So here's the top 25 that's announced every week. I keep waiting to see the top 25 academic report, and maybe there ought to be a sliding scale, right? So here's your football, performance, and then you measure in the academic performance, and there's a sliding scale that's weighted, and then that ends up with a true national champion. I know it'll never happen, but it's fun to think about, and just a fun thing to kind of laugh about, even though it's not laughable, of this real intent to have kids that are high achievers, be great at everything, and also be supported in everything from their leaders, right? And let's face it, there are plenty of football buildings kids walk into, and I'm not sure other things other than football are emphasized. The masterful programs are the ones, right, where they're getting lots of input and emphasis on the things in addition to, not in place of, right, in addition to high achieving in football, so they can be high achieving in so many things. And those are the people, and those are the places that I'm drawn to, and those are the guests that will be on the show. And hopefully that will resonate as folks see that.
Absolutely, and I feel a bit like a third wheel, kind of jumping in here between a conversation between two friends. But Dave, I know we could probably go on for another hour here, just getting into your philosophy and everything going on there in Winston-Salem. Appreciate it so much for you joining us, and best of luck the rest of the way on already a very successful season there for Wake Forest.
Thanks so much, Brian, and Bronco. Thanks for having me on as a guest. I'm really honored, and the respect I have for you. So, to be in the company of you and Chris Peterson last week, to me, you are two of the coaches in this industry that I've respected the most. So wherever you end up, they're going to be extremely lucky, Bronco.
Thanks, Dave. Best of luck the rest of the way. And for all of our listeners, we sure hope we're just adding value from people that you can see and hear, a unique, different, and insightful way to do things that really makes a difference.
Absolutely. And if you're out there, go ahead and tell your friends about the podcast, HeadCoachU, HeadCoachU.com, and you can find all the download links to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching here on YouTube as well. Go ahead and give us 5 stars. This is a 5-star podcast. Come on. We got some 5-star coaches here. Go ahead and give us the podcast 5 stars. But for Dave Clawson, for Bronco Mendenhall, I am Bryan Fischer. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of HeadCoachU. We'll catch you next week.